Good afternoon. This is episode 36 of the Contextual Podcast. I decided now, as a big MMA fan, I don't cover it enough on the podcast. So when there's a big event on, I'm going to do a bit of a results, after sort of results and reaction podcast, all by my lonesome, unless anybody wants to come on who's into MMA. All I'm going to do is review UFC 222 that was on at the weekend. Main event was Chris Cyborg against Konitskaya, who's an Invicta champ for the women's title, and then the co-main event was Frankie Edgar v Brian Ortega. But what I'm going to do is just give a rundown from the main card. I'm not really bothered about, no, I'm not bothered because I haven't watched them properly yet, but the prelims, because there's usually 4 or 5 fights on there. So I'm just going to give a bit of a rundown of the main card, basically. It was on Saturday night, Sunday morning in the UK. Got up Sunday early to watch it, as I always do. So I just thought it deserved a bit more time than a quick 5-10 minute, mention, because it is quite a big part of my sort of sporting life now with football. There's probably not as much as United, but it's not far off these days. I'm listening to that many podcasts and shows. And I'll give a couple of plugs at the end as well. But first things first, my other podcast that I do with my good friend Dave Horrocks, Comics in Motion. The 3rd episode went live yesterday. We decided to review Black Panther. Both went to the cinema last week. And the reviews are up there now. So if you want to follow us at Comics in Motion P on Twitter, or if you want to email us at comicsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com, get in contact, okay? You'll see me retweeting through my Contextual Pod 1 Twitter handle, because I've just changed it from Contextual World, and all the Contextual Podcast, which is my other Twitter handle for both of them. The more main one you can get me on is Contextual Pod 1 on Twitter. But any questions, give us a shout. But yeah, it's Comics in Motion P on Twitter and Comics in Motion Podcast@gmail.com. So give us a shout out. Have a listen, actually, see what you think, whether you agree with mine and Dave's, because we both give totally different scores on the film. Both enjoyed it, but one person enjoyed it more than the other, and I'm not saying who that was, so you'll have to listen to it. Anyway, yeah, so UFC 222. So we'll start with the main card. Was Kat Zingano, who's been in various different films. She was in Strike Force, MMA. She was seen as the only contender for Cyborg, who's obviously in the main event. So she'd not fought for nearly 2 years. So she was up against the Brazilian Vieira, who was 19-0. And he started off, it was a good fight, but Zingano, I don't know what happened, but her whole guard, chin, the way she was standing was really, really bizarre. He went the distance, but Zingano got beat. She was throwing haymakers, kept catching Vieira, but Vieira's wrestling and jiu-jitsu was on another level, really. She controlled her. After about 3 minutes into the first round, she just kept getting her down then. And, Zingano was kicking her a lot in the stomach and the thighs, and she was catching her with this overhand right. It was like a bit of a sloppy overhand right, but it was catching her every time. So that sort of went to decision, but Vieira won, and quite rightly, to be honest. I thought that was a really, really good fight. Quite technical, really. It was just weird with Kat Zingano because she was always a contender or there and thereabouts, but she's like 36 now, 37, and I think, like they say it all the time with the fighting, but the age does catch up with you. Granddad time catches up with you, and she was looking like really she's not got many more fights left in her, or if she has, as you do with a lot of the fighters, they sort of cherry pick opponents, like BJ Penn, people like that. They're sort of legends in the day, but as they've got older, they can't sustain it against the younger opponents. So, but yeah, it was a good fight. What I would say is, if you haven't got BT Sport and that, just sort of segueing off a little bit, there's a couple of websites that I use where you can actually get the full fights. They're not in sort of chronological order as you would watch them if you're watching a 3-hour sort of presentation on BT Sport or wherever you watch it. But you've got MMA Core and MMA Junkie. So if there's anything I've missed that isn't on sort of British UK TV, then I'll go down that route to watch them. The only spoiler with them is, especially on MMA Core, is you can see the times of the fight. So if you've got a part 1, 2, and 3, it's going a full distance. If you've got one that's 6-7 minutes long, which isn't a bad thing, you're getting a knockout. So it does sort of spoil what's going to happen. You don't know who's won because it doesn't have like on the caption thing who's won, but it does sort of spoil it sometimes if you've missed them and you watch them, because you pretty much know there's going to be some sort of knockout or submission pretty quick, or something's going to go to a decision. And then sometimes I do avoid the decision stuff till after I've watched the main things, because it's sometimes if they're like these, they're just wrestling, jiu-jitsu, a lot of the casual fans are seen as boring, and I watch them afterwards because they're quite technical. I love watching that sort of game of chess. But yeah, if not, obviously the UFC Fight Pass as well. It's a subscription-based thing like Netflix. They've got loads of different, not just UFC events, a lot of the old stuff from Pride back in the late 90s, early 2000s over in Japan, which was, to quote Mr. Brendan Sharp, they're all juiced up to the gills. There was no restrictions on gear, steroids, whatever. So everybody was just like monsters. And there's some great fights. There's a lot of freak show fights, but Pride is great. It's really, really good fights, some brilliant stuff. And I think they can kick in the head as well in some of the fights. Well, I think most of the fights, which is quite dangerous now in the UFC. But yeah, it was all basically no holds barred in Pride. And then from there, you've got a lot of the kickboxing places. You've got Invicta. They have a lot of the UK MMA scene on there as well. So it's not just UFC stuff. You can watch a lot of the independent events. And sometimes when I've watched it and I subscribe to it, is you've got a lot of like up and comers who they'll pick out, and there's loads of the reality stuff on there. You can watch all the Ultimate Fighters again if you're into that, the reality show, which was a huge success sort of around the mid 2000s to sort of 2005 to 10. It was great. Now it's still going, but last 6, 7, 8 years, it's not been the same. It's not garnered the audience anymore, or the imagination of people, but that's on there. So yeah, so if you want to watch anything like this, anything I'm sort of mentioning, it pricks your interest to sort of watch a bit of MMA, UFC stuff, then you know they're the ones you want to go to if you don't want to pay. So it's MMA Junkie for like all your news and stuff. That's what I use. Okay, or bjpenn.com for daily news, views, different interviews with different people across all the MMA world. They do a bit of boxing on there as well. But bjpenn.com on Twitter and Facebook's usually pretty good. Yeah, so I had the first fight out of the way. Now the second fight was Andrei Arlovski v Stefan Struve. Now Andrei Arlovski was the UFC champ around about the sort of mid 2005, 6, 7, 8. He was quite relevant then with Tim Sylvia. And as he's got older now, he's more renowned for getting knocked out quite convincingly. He's had a few victories because it's sort of like, you know, if he don't hit you, then you'll hit him sort of thing, especially in the heavyweight division where they go down anyway because they hit so hard. But he's had a bit of a renaissance in the last couple of fights. He's had a good couple of wins, then he got beat and sort of looked like he was pushing back up there because the heavyweight division in the UFC is an old man's division. It's very, very hard. A lot of up and comers. You know, Francis Ngannou was sort of thrown to the wolves, really. Stipe absolutely schooled him. I thought he was going to beat Stipe and knock him out, but he got absolutely shown up for the fact he didn't have any wrestling. So someone like Arlovski, even though I think he's 37, 38 now, he's still got a chance of getting a title run. Give him a few victories and a couple of knockouts here and there, and he's got a chance, which is quite bizarre because most of the other divisions, once they get to a certain age, they can never get back to it. But because obviously they always say the last thing to go in the heavyweights or any sort of boxer or MMA fighter is your power. So anybody really can out. That's why Brock Lesnar now for making a comeback, because he's in the US, the WWE, and he's negotiating his contract. So he could come back and within a couple of fights be champ again. That's how stupid it is in the heavyweight division. But yeah, so he was Andrei the Pitbull Arlovski. His record's 26-15 with 1 no contest. And then he was against Stefan the Skyscraper Struve. He was a Dutch. He's a kickboxer recently, but he's 6'11" and a half, nearly 7 foot. He's just a monster. He's the biggest guy in the heavyweight division, but he's had a few highlight reel knockouts against him when he's been sparked himself. So he always seems to get a bit of momentum and then loses. Now, this fight, there's a massive difference. Arlovski's 6'3", so he's a big bloke. He's bigger than me, but he looked tiny compared to Struve. He looked like they were different weight classes, but it was a 3-round fight, and each round was sort of Arlovski doing the business. There was a lot of inside kicks to his thighs, through his thighs. He had massive red marks on the inside of his thigh. He wobbled him a couple of times. He nearly submitted him. He seemed to throw him around quite easy, which is unbelievable because he's probably 30, 40 pounds difference between the two. And then, I mean, to be fair, Struve was ponderous. He kept saying on the commentary, Joe Rogan and Cormier, like he should be boxing behind his jab. He should be using his jab, Struve. He's 6'11", you know, make the range count, but he doesn't seem to throw a jab. And then, I mean, I've heard him say it before and never noticed it as much, but it was really noticeable. Now, he's only 30, but he looked really, really old in this fight, really struggled. This one went to a decision, and the decision was right for a change because we were panicking about the judges because of some dodgy decisions in the prelims, I believe. I'll have to go, like I said, I have to go back and watch them. But yeah, Orlovsky won it, and quite right, to be honest. The third round was a bit of a shit show, as they say. It was just ponderous, sort of nobody giving anything. Struve really should have come out and swung for the fences. I think the decision was right, and at the end, you know, Struve had said like it wasn't his best. I just don't see where he goes whenever he sort of goes up against someone in the top 10, and Orlovsky's probably around about 9 or 10. He just gets sussed out. So it's a weird division, like I've just said, and you know it's that bad that Cormier's coming up. Daniel Cormier, the light heavyweight champion's coming back up to heavyweight, where he's undefeated. To be fair, he never got beat at heavyweight, and he's fighting Stipe for the title. And with all intensive purposes, he's got a very, very good chance of actually beating him and out wrestling him and winning the title, grinding him down. So he could end up with, I think it's July. I think we could end up with the two-weight champion again, like that one. So that was that fight. I'll leave that one out of the way. The next one's, now this is a good fight. This, if anyone is out there, there's a lad called Sean O'Malley. Now he was on Dana White has a couple of shows looking for a recommend on YouTube where he has Matt Serra, and it was originally a guy called Nick the Tooth, who's Dana White's mate, but they fell out, and now it's Din Thomas, who actually fought Matt Serra years ago and beat him, even though it's contentious. Matt Serra beat him on the night, but they went in the back and they drew on. So it's Din Thomas. So he's actually called Dean, well, it's D-I-N, Din, I don't know why they call it, but it's Dean Thomas, they say. And he's a coach, American top team. He coaches like Tyrone Champ as well. He does a lot of comedy stuff now. Now he's not a fighter. A lot of stand-up improv things, a bit like whose line is it anyway? So they go around sort of America, do stupid things, you know, bull riding, motorcycle, you know, like Harley Davidson's joining like Hell's Angels groups. And it culminates at the end. They go into like local MMA shows looking for fighters to sign on for the UFC. And it's a good show. So he's had that, and then he brought another one out called Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, where it's a lot of like round robin fights and stuff. And this Sean O'Malley's from there. He was a sort of on his local scene where he's from. He was well known fighter, undefeated, 9-0, and he's against a guy called Andre Sukumtai, who's 12-5 record. Now, the fight, the guy, this O'Malley, come out, he's covered in tattoos. He's got like a braid thing because he's got curly hair, but he's got it all braided. He comes out very much in the style of Conor McGregor. This sort of wide legs, arms wide, you know, doing all this at range. And he's there, you know, like they do to sort of stop the guard. And he just took him to school. For the first round, he just took the mick. He just kept taking Sukumtai's legs away from him. He dropped him a few times. At one point, I thought he'd actually broke his leg. He kicked him that hard, and this Sukumtai was all over the place, wobbling. At the end of the first, he didn't know what day it was. You could just tell the difference. He was like a hybrid MMA fighter. And the second round was the same. Sukumtai come out, obviously been told by his corner, you know, get out there and do the business. But he got absolutely schooled then again for another, well, probably a minute of the second round, he was in charge. And after that, this lad O'Malley just took over. He had him on the ground. He should have submitted him. He nearly got him in a crucifix submission. And then we go into the third round and everything's pretty much going as planned. And then O'Malley decides, we didn't decide, he went for another kick and broke his ankle or his metatarsal or something because he couldn't stand on it. So for literally for the next 2 minutes, this Sukumtai was sort of wrestling him, trying to, I mean, he couldn't do anything with it. This O'Malley ground the time down. He was that far ahead on the score sheets. It was obviously a 10-8 in the first round because he knocked him down with some of these kicks. But what was quite interesting was they did the result, and O'Malley won, quite rightly won, but because his leg was sick, he was screaming in pain. Joe Rogan had to go and do the interview when he was lay on his back, which is quite a good one. And he was talking about, improving and everything. But he's definitely someone to watch out for. Absolute belting fighter. He's got everything: submissions, ground game. He's got the wrestling, the kicks, the punches, everything. It was dead unorthodox, very much a hybrid like Conor McGregor in some respects. And probably even better, his submission stuff was better than what McGregor's got at the moment, because it's never really been shown what McGregor's got other than some early Bama fights where he fought over in the UK, or Cage Warrior ones, whichever they were. But yeah, keep an eye out for him, Sean O'Malley. The next one was the co-main event. Now, this was Frankie Edgar v Brian Ortega. Now, Frankie Edgar has been the champ in the past. This is fighting at 145, which originally was Conor's weight. Conor's now 155. He was the 155 champ, Conor, and 145 champ. Max Holloway's the champ, and Frankie Edgar should be fighting Max Holloway, and twice it's been called off. Once because of Edgar, and the second time now was because of Max Holloway. Now, Max Holloway is not the sort of fighter to dip, neither is Frankie Edgar. And Frankie Edgar's a great fighter, so technical. He's always been there or thereabouts. He's had the belt. He beat BJ Penn. He absolutely caned BJ Penn a few years ago when he was the champ. I think that was at lightweight, that 155, before they made like the 145 belt. But he's a small guy, Edgar. He doesn't have to really cut any weight. So he's so quick and fast and elusive, and he's got loads of power. So this fight was interesting, but because Frankie Edgar pulled out, Brian Ortega stepped in. Now, Brian Ortega is one of the absolute masters, absolute different level jiu-jitsu. And even though Frankie Edgar's a black belt and all that, this guy is just on a different planet. He's a young guy, 26, 27 years old. He's a boxer by trade, but he's just absolutely took to the jiu-jitsu stuff. And some of the submissions and moves he gets on people when he gets hold of them, it's just, these levels. And there is levels to this game. I could never understand that as a human being, like a man to man. You're always going to get someone who's a nutter and can look after themselves. When they say in fighting and at these levels, it's very much like football. As someone who practices MMA on just a club level sort of thing, and I'm learning all the time, and I've only been doing it for like a year, so that's how basic I am. And I know the fundamentals of boxing and jiu-jitsu and that, but it doesn't mean I could get in there with someone who's someone's done it for 10 years or even 5 years, I'd probably get absolutely licked. So there is levels to it. And when someone says the world class, like a boxer or something, it's very hard to understand until you're in there with them. And I've noticed that even with people who fought, and I've never fought like at a competitive level at all, I'm just doing it for sort of self-defense and awareness of the sport, 'cause I love MMA. But seeing it, this Ortega's just different gravy. So the fight was a 3-round fight, even though it's co-main event, because it wasn't for the title, it wasn't 5 rounds. And I must admit, I've got like a cue cards I was writing down with each round. I thought this was going to go the distance because Edgar's renowned for having such a good gas tank. His punch output is, I think there's only Bisping who's close to him for the amount of punches he throws per round. He's had the most time in the octagon ever, 6 hours 27 minutes. He's had, he's been in there fighting, so he's absolute. Not only is he a legend, he's also absolutely seasoned with experience that not a lot of people can do unless you're actually fighting in there. So he's done everything. He's been dropped a couple of times, never been stopped. He's done all sorts. Most of his stuff goes to decisions. So this Ortega steps in at 3 weeks' notice. He's ranked number 3. Edgar's ranked number 2. And it is like a title eliminator for fighting against Max Holloway. And the fight starts, and the one thing that's apparent from the start is Ortega's severely bigger. He's only about 5'9", but Frankie's only about 5'5", and you can just tell. But Ortega looks literally a division above him. He looks like a lot bigger. He wasn't as ripped as Frankie, but he just looked imposing. And then he's a southpaw, so he had this sort of southpaw hook he was throwing in, kept trying to throw it in. He got hold of Edgar once in the first round, trying to sort of got him in a guillotine, standing guillotine, but he couldn't lock it in. They carried on fighting, and then from nowhere, Ortega just threw this left uppercut absolutely on the money, and he literally just took him off his feet, Frankie Edgar, and dropped him, and that was it. He got a few punches in, but it was all over. So like Frankie Edgar's had 27 fights, and in all them fights, he's never, ever been stopped. He's been dropped a couple of times, but he's always recovered. and carried on fighting. Even some he's recovered and won, from there in other rounds. But no, Ortega just lifted him off his feet. If you get a chance, have a look on YouTube, or as I said, MMA Core, and that the actual uppercut knockout was an absolute peach. It was a highlight reel job. You couldn't have hit it any better. And he just put him on his arse, and that was it. He tried to get a couple of hammer blows in, and it was all over. There's no way Edgar could have got back from that. It wasn't an early stoppage or anything. It was absolutely the right decision. And at like 36 years old, Frank Edgar's taken a lot of beatings in his time. So I think the ref called it absolutely on the money for me. Absolute perfect. A great fight. And now that sets up Max Holloway when he's back from injury against Brian Ortega. And I think Ortega's going to beat Holloway. Holloway's great fighter, technical, everything. But I just think that he's going to have too much from Ortega. The ground game especially, there's no way he's such... I mean, he's quite wiry, Max Holloway, so he's not being disrespectful, but I just don't think it'll do anything with Ortega unless he gets a lucky knockdown, or not lucky, but, he drops him or something. Then I can't see anything else happening. So yeah, so watch out for that, Brian Ortega. And on Twitter, his name's BT City, because his name's Brian T City Ortega is his nickname. I'm not sure what the T stands for, T City, but yeah, that's what yes I do. He told us this. Brian Triangle City Ortega, because he's a master at triangle submissions. I should know that. But that's what we get a chance. It helps a lot. Something up with helping children and that, like raising these charity places and that. And then on to the main event. Well, it was the co-main event. It's the women's champion, Chris Cyborg, against the Invicta champ. Now, I think her name's Kunitskaya, she's called. She'd never fought in the UFC before, but she's a champ from Russia. Because the problem is this Chris Cyborg, if you get a chance, have a look online, Chris Cyborg. She's been a champ, whatever. She's predominantly a kickboxer originally. She does boxing. She trains with men. She's absolutely massive. I mean, she looks, to be fair, I'm not being disrespectful, she looks like she's been on gear and that. She's got pot ones for steroids, but she's really, really muscly, strong. And what they found is the UFC made a 145 weight class because she can't go down. She's tried to get down to 135 because one of the fights was going to be over Ronda Rousey, which now, looking back, she would have absolutely hammered Ronda Rousey. But she can't get down. She walks around at about 180, 190 pounds. And literally, there's no women will fight. And what's happening is this Kunitskaya has come in and she's got, basically, they had a fight. She's come in and she'll drop straight down to 135 because that's a real weight. So they've had a couple of women fight her who are fighting at their sort of walk around weight, which they say you shouldn't really do that. You need to cut weight to get in your division. If you're not cutting weight, then you've got a power disadvantage. And it was shown again. I mean, this fight started and she's cornered by Tito Ortiz, who used to be the UFC light heavyweight champion. He was a trailblazer around about the early to mid 2000s. With Chuck Liddell and that. So he's in a corner, he supported her all the time. She trains with him in Big Bear. And it was just a one-sided, it's just a joke, really. This Kunitskaya come out, and for about a minute, she had control of Cyborg, had her on the floor. She grabbed the leg straight away because she didn't want anything to do with the punches. And once they got back up, there was a little point where you thought Kunitskaya may actually submit her. But then it just was all over, absolutely all over. She got to grip with her Cyborg. All she did was throw a couple of punches. The first proper exchange, this Kunitskaya hits the deck, turtles up behind it all. She's on the floor, gets up, does it again. And then for the third time, she just absolutely pummeled her and the ref had to stop it. And it's a shame, really, because this girl looked physically almost on par with her, but she just didn't have the tools. And there was a total mission. And again, like I was saying before, there's levels to this game, and this girl didn't look at the same level. But the problem they've got is they're now going to give who beat Ronda Rousey, Amanda Nunes. But she's not a 145, she's a 135. So hammered. Well, she's a great fighter, but it's not her weight class. So Cyborg will be dropping, and this Nunes probably won't have to lose any weight to fight at 145. So it's just one of them things. Cyborg's such a good fighter, but there's just nobody to challenge her. They need someone to come in of the same stature from nowhere and give her a challenge, give her that epic fight. Because at the moment, it's too much of a walkover. It's so one-sided. The whole division's created for her, but she's the only one, like I say, who's actually the official weight that they should be, really, having to cut the weight. All the others are just blown up. I think she fights at bantamweight. I think they're blown up. Oh, gosh, what is it? Straw weight or fly, whatever it is. But yeah, so bit of a weird one. Great victory. She's won the title. She's had about 2 or 3 defenses now already, and it just seems to be so one-sided. She'll go down as one of the best ever, but for me, I wanted to get beat to see what she's made of in some respects. So I'll go into a fight where she's actually getting challenged. She's not getting challenged enough at the moment. Now, that's basically all from UFC 222. The only thing I wanted to talk about is on April 7th, it's UFC 223, and that is Khabib Nurmagomedov against Tony Ferguson. They've tried to fight a couple of times. This time was supposed to be for the interim title until Conor McGregor comes back. It's the 155 title which McGregor's got. But now everything's happened. They've been saying it for ages, and Conor's getting his belt taken off him. So this is actually for the undisputed title, and it's going to be a great fight. Absolute barn buster of a fight. Khabib is just an absolute animal wrestler. So technical because he's a Sambo trained. He's from Dagestan, I think. I think it's like a Russian part of Russia, or it was sort of an offshoot of Russia. And then you've got Tony Ferguson, who is a rangy fighter, long punches, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Eddie Bravo. Eddie Bravo's one of the friends of Joe Rogan. If you ever watched Joe Rogan podcast, he's a blazing fat, but he's got his own 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. So Tony's under him, trains under him for all that sort of thing. Joe Rogan trains with Tony as well. But it's just one of them things where I can't see past Khabib, and I don't think Conor's going to fight Khabib unless Khabib gets knocked. I mean, he got wobbled against Michael Johnson, and he's a southpaw like Conor. I think Conor's the only way you do it, Conor, is if you hit him a couple of times, he slips that underneath him, it's all over. It don't matter how good Conor is and how much he talks. And I like Conor a lot. I don't like Khabib. I just can't see any other way. So this is going to be a hell of a test. I mean, Ferguson's that tight that he'd probably take him to the ground on purpose just to see what all the fuss is about. But this Khabib trains with Daniel Cormier and Cain Velasquez, and they're heavyweights, and he gives them a run for the money. You know, so his fight, they're like 250, 240 pound people, and he's like maybe 200. So he's giving away nearly 50 pounds. I mean, he cuts down to 155, so he's got cut 45 to 40 pounds. It's a lot. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out, whether Conor comes back later on in the year and, you know, trying to regain his title and that for money. I just don't think the money's there. So we'll see. Well, yeah, so I'm not going to bore you too much. That was my Contextual Podcast MMA style, which I am going to do every time there's an event on now. I'm going to review it and just do a quick half an hour podcast just for my own peace of mind as well. People have been asking me about it, so I thought I'd throw it out there. And as I said before, Comics in Motion podcast on Twitter is at Comics in Motion P, and email is comicsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com if you want to get us to review any films, TV, any sort of media regarding comic books. We're available. It doesn't have to be Marvel and DC, even obscure stuff. There's some sort of physical TV or film attached to it, and we'll definitely review it. You can contact me on this at the Contextual Podcast or at Contextual Pod 1 on Twitter. Email me at the contextualpodcast@gmail.com. I want to thank Bibby for being on last week, episode 35. Steve-O was on 34. He couldn't get his 5th or 6th ball, a double hat trick, because he's an absolute muppet. But he should be on this week. If not, I've got a few people lined up. I've got a good friend who's become a good friend, a guy called Matt Bridger. He's going to be coming on maybe over the Easter weekend. He's a vlogger who I'm following on YouTube, totally different to what I do, nothing to do with gaming or anything, but he's a vlogger who goes to Vegas twice a year, and as someone who absolutely loves Las Vegas, and I've not been for 5 years, even though I love it because of, you know, financial things and holidays and that, and I'm going back this year, baby. So I've got to have him on because I love watching his vlogs going back to like 2014, these hundreds of videos. I've got him and Nikki as well. Nicky Firmage, who I've mentioned before, he's going to come on around about October time after his trip, just before I go for me 40th. No, I don't look 40 before you say anything. Yeah. Okay, maybe I do. But yeah, so it's something totally different. So we're just going to talk about Vegas. Matt's a Sheffield Wednesday fan, so he may talk about Sheffield Wednesday. He has told me he's not, because they must be doing pretty bad. I'm not really paying much attention to the Championship or League One. But yeah, he's definitely coming on. So this has been the Contextual Podcast MMA UFC 222 review. This is going to become a regular thing. If you don't like it, please listen to the gaming stuff, which will be on later this week. We've probably got B-Man coming on as well, talk about Pez at some point, sat in his on his bed with his beer, and everyone seemed to like that episode. So he's going to come on, and we're going to have a full discussion on how we say David De Gea or David De Gea, whichever way he says it, because he seems to have a real issue with the way I say it. And yeah, okay, so I'll see you probably Thursday. Bye.